Hello and welcome to lecture number 10. We'll continue the discussion of the Second World War today, and I'll talk about World War II, the home front. There are two overriding concepts this lecture will address overall. First, we'll see that the national government grew dramatically in its size and power during World War II. Secondly, we'll also see how the war impacted American society, the economy, and race relations. Changes were similar to those which took place during the First World War, but World War II brought about changes which were deeper and longer lasting. As you follow this lecture, in the back of your mind you might want to consider an evaluation of this subject. Were the changes brought about by the war positive or negative for the nation? The steps taken to finance the war effort demonstrate one aspect of how the government's power grew during the war. The cost of American involvement in World War II was incredibly high, about 10 times the cost of World War I. The average was about $250 million a day for approximately 4 years. There were two primary solutions for raising the money. A little more than half of the money was borrowed from the American people as they purchased war bonds. As we can see from these statistics, American debt increased quite a bit. This figure demonstrates how the national debt increased during the 1940s. The massive expenditures undertaken by the national government ended the Great Depression and brought prosperity to many American workers. The second solution to the problem of financing the war came in the form of the Revenue Act of 1942. The Revenue Act transformed the way the American people were taxed. Among other things, it implemented withholding taxes so that tax revenues were taken out of people's paychecks when they received them each week. Secondly, tax rates for all Americans were increased, and for the first time in U.S. history, low and middle-income Americans paid taxes on their wages. By 1945, the national government took in 20 times the revenue it had generated in 1940. This clearly shows the growing power of the national government. Several agencies were formed during the war as the government began to control more aspects of people's lives and the economy. This figure demonstrates the increasing number of American civilians working for the federal government during the 1940s. They worked in a variety of new agencies. I'd like to talk about 3. The first of these agencies is the War Productions Board. It was headed by Don Nelson, the former head of Sears and Roebuck Company. The job of the War Productions Board was to oversee the conversion of the U.S. economy from producing civilian to military supplies. There are a variety of industries which could be used as an example, but possibly the best example would be the automobile industry, which stopped producing cars for American consumers in February of 1942. The War Productions Board was incredibly successful, and by late 1942, the United States produced more military goods than Germany, Italy, and Japan combined. There are many examples of how the auto industry mobilized during World War II. Chrysler specialized in tanks. Some statistics below demonstrate the success of Chrysler's activities. Overall, the United States built at least 50,000 tanks during the war. Ford specialized in producing Jeeps and planes. At its Willow Run facility, a long assembly line, about 1 mile in length and a quarter-mile wide, was so efficient by the end of the war that one completed plane left the assembly line about every 63 minutes. Many regions of the West experienced economic growth during and after World War II due to the defense contracts awarded by the War Productions Board. This is shown in this photograph of a Boeing assembly plant in the Seattle area. Another agency created during the war was the Office of Price Administration. It was in charge of rationing and establishing price controls. Their slogan was, "Use it up, wear it out, make it do, or do without." During the war, families were issued ration books. In order to purchase a variety of goods, not only did they have to have the money for the item, they also had to give a ration ticket to the grocer in order to obtain those products. A variety of goods had to be purchased in this way. A partial list is included below. In order to cut down on consumption of gasoline and wear and tear on tires, a national speed limit was implemented during World War II. Do you know what it was? 35 miles an hour. Another government agency was the Office of Censorship. This was designed to promote patriotism and manage public opinion. There were a variety of activities of this group. First of all, they examined letters going to servicemen overseas. Secondly, a year passed before casualty figures were reported from the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. Also, the publication of photos of American war dead were prohibited until 1943. Following concerns that the public was becoming overconfident during the war, the media was encouraged to publicize accounts of Japanese atrocities against American soldiers. So what we've seen with the creation of these government agencies is a tremendous growth in the size and power of the national government. World War II also impacted American society and the economy. An initial trait to consider would be patriotism. One area where we see tremendous patriotism would deal with the American military. In 1941, the U.S. Armed Forces numbered 1.6 million. By 1945, there were 15 million men and 350,000 women in the armed forces. On the left and right, these posters show images used for recruitment. School children, individual investors, small and large businesses showed their support by purchasing war bonds to help fund the war effort. Americans also showed their patriotism by volunteering in a variety of different activities. Many adults became air raid wardens. They also organized collection drives to recycle a variety of goods, including cooking grease, tires, and maybe even used paper. Kids who became involved in the recycling were labeled as Tin Can Colonels or Uncle Sam Scrappers. As shown with this poster, everyone could contribute so as not to forget what happened at Pearl Harbor. The nation's economy was also impacted dramatically by American involvement in World War II. I think these figures show the tremendous economic boom which took place in the United States with the tremendous expenditures by the national government in defense industries. We see a huge increase in the gross national product in billions of dollars. This also trickled down to the American people as wages and salaries increased dramatically as well. Overall, average wages for all workers more than doubled during the war. Unemployment virtually ceased to exist, in sharp contrast to the widespread unemployment of the 1930s. The economic boom impacted demographic patterns in the United States. An effort was undertaken by the national government to expand the industrial base to new regions of the country, so states like California, as shown in this map, saw its population increase dramatically as companies received many defense contracts from that state. Washington and Michigan also saw population increases, whereas Oklahoma, Kentucky, and North Carolina lost population. Now we can explore how family life was impacted during this era. Women's roles were impacted dramatically by World War II. Between 1941 and 45, over 6 million women entered the workforce for the first time. By 1945, about 33% of the workforce was female. Many of these new female workers were married, so for the first time, married women made up a large percentage of the women working outside the home. Women continued to be responsible for traditional chores such as cooking, cleaning, and caring for children. On the right, we see the popular image of Rosie the Riveter. Women demonstrated they could contribute to the wartime economy in a wide variety of ways, as shown in these images. On the left, we see women train operators in New York, and on the right, we see women in the service. There wasn't equal pay for equal work. On average, women earned about 65 cents for every dollar earned by a man in a similar job. The war also impacted the American family. Marriages and birth rates increased dramatically. However, so too did divorces, as seen with these statistics. High school enrollments dropped as many teenagers worked in defense plants, and rates of juvenile delinquency increased fivefold, prompting some to argue there was a crisis involving the American family and a breakdown in traditional family values. American involvement in the war also impacted race relations throughout the country. Native Americans played a unique role in the war effort. About 25,000 served in the armed forces. Many Navajo specialized as code talkers, as they were employed at times to speak their native language to relay messages. The Navajo code was never broken by the Japanese. Many Native Americans left reservations, in some cases for the first time, to work in different defense-related industries. The average income of Native American households tripled during the war. We see a photograph here of the Tuskegee Airmen. This was the first ever African American aerial fighting unit. Overall, about 1 million black Americans served in the armed forces. Most served in segregated units under white officers. African Americans on the home front were also impacted by World War II. Over 700,000 blacks left the South for northern and western cities in hopes of getting jobs in defense industries. This was the map that I showed earlier showing the changing demographic patterns in the country. Well, African Americans influenced this as well. Seattle's black population went from 4 to 40,000 during the war, and the number of African Americans in Detroit increased by nearly 50,000. Wages for African American laborers did increase during the war nearly fourfold. Many hoped to leave discrimination and Jim Crow laws behind as they searched for new economic opportunities, but racial tension did develop in some areas of the country for a variety of reasons. Some people were upset in general over lack of housing caused by the war. In other cases, blacks grew tired of facing discrimination, while whites resisted racial equality. Racial violence took place in several cities in the United States, including Harlem, Mobile, and Beaumont, Texas, but the largest took place in the city of Detroit in 1943. In the end, 25 blacks and 9 whites were killed. Below are hyperlinks to more background information as well as images associated with the Detroit race riots. Hispanics were also impacted by World War II. During the war, the United States negotiated the Bracero program to help with labor shortages in the agriculture industry. American farmers became dependent upon the work of Bracero laborers and often encouraged illegal immigration during and after World War II. Racial tension was demonstrated by the so-called Zoot Suit riots in 1943, which left about 100 people injured in Los Angeles. For more information, click on the hyperlink below. Following the attacks on Pearl Harbor by the Japanese Navy, many Americans feared another attack and blamed members of the Japanese American community. Some called for the incarceration of all those of Japanese heritage living in the United States. Internment of the Japanese became reality in early 1942 when Franklin Roosevelt signed Executive Order No. 9066. This required about 110,000 Japanese Americans living on the West Coast to be relocated into what were called internment camps. 2/3 of those who were interned were American citizens. Later, as the hysteria subsided, about 18,000 men served in the U.S. military. This was the 442nd Combat Team. An entirely segregated unit made up of Japanese Americans was the most decorated unit in the military during the Second World War. Conditions in the internment camps were far from ideal, but these were not concentration camps which led to the Holocaust, as is shown with the picture here from Germany. Hitler's final solution led to the deaths of 6 million Jews. Several million others fell victim to the Holocaust, including many gypsies, communists, homosexuals, and others. In 1944, the Supreme Court upheld the internment of the Japanese. However, by the 1980s, attitudes had changed. This was seen when a government commission in 1982 officially apologized for the government's actions. In 1988, Congress voted to compensate each surviving internee with a one-time payment of $20,000. This concludes the core of the lecture material for World War II, the home front. However, there are some important concepts which can now be reviewed. Overall, the United States was impacted greatly by its involvement in the Second World War. We see this in the growth in the size and power of the national government, and the economy, society, and race relations were impacted tremendously as well. Hopefully, you can come to your own conclusion as to whether or not you think these changes were positive or negative for the nation. Well, this concludes lecture number 10, World War II, the home front. The next few slides will offer hyperlinks for additional information, as well as sources used for this lecture. Have a great day.